Speaking of Alternatives with Keshav Rajagopalan, Managing Director, Head of Strategic Capital Group at PGIM. Owning and operating real assets brings into play elements that are generally outside the world of traditional asset management. RealAssetX, PGIM's innovation lab, embraces calculated risk-taking and even failure as key aspects of innovation, with a goal of creating critical breakthroughs. Keshav explores the world of RealAssetX with Naqash Tahir, Managing Director of Research and Development and Investments at RealX.
Welcome to Speaking of Alternatives, the podcast where we dig deep into the many layers of the alternatives landscape. Today, I'm really excited to have this conversation with Naqash Tahir, my colleague and Managing Director at PGIM, who leads our R&D and investments efforts for RealAssetX. Welcome, Naqash.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited about this conversation because it's a little different than we normally do. Typically, guests and colleagues on the podcast, we dive deep into an investment strategy and learn about how that strategy is positioned. This will be a fun conversation because it's about a platform. It's something that PGIM and that you're spearheading in the real asset space in terms of how we turn to being on the forefront of what's happening in the industry from a technology perspective, a research and development perspective. So really excited about the difference here and how we're going to have this conversation.
Looking forward to it.
Before we dive in, let's talk a little bit about you. Tell me about your journey, what brought you into this industry, this space of work, and then PGIM as well.
Thank you once again. So I started my career, I finished in the computer science and undergrad and become a software developer actually early on. And that's what I enjoyed, developing really cool solutions. But then I had this entrepreneur mindset. So early on, I did start one tech startup, one non-tech startup, and then worked for a very small boutique consulting firm, consulting across capital markets, real estate, insurance, banks sector. But really my focus had been for the last 15 years in the real asset space and asset management space, consulting from a digital transformation perspective, from a perspective of how we can actually innovate within our real asset and asset management space. And then for 10 years, I've led technology teams, I've led innovation teams. And of course, technology is being used as a kind of efficiency tool, but technology can also be a great opportunity for us to look ahead and what markets looks like in the future. So we want to put ourselves at the forefront of that wave. And that's why I've been involved quite actively and very early on with developing the RealAssetX story, which we'll go through it a bit more detail.
It's really interesting. You use the word future-proofing. So let's go there. Talk to me about what RealAssetX is. For many of our listeners, probably not something they may have come across quite yet. We're going to change that through this conversation. What is it and what does it mean to be kind of at the forefront and future-proofing where our business is?
RealAssetX is PGIM's innovation lab. We launched it in October 2023. It's a platform of R&D and incubation where we build to research, develop, and invest in technologies to accelerate the advancements in the real assets sector. Practically talking about it, we'll say it's a bridge between three worlds that move at a different pace. You have academia, you have venture capital and startup, and you have the corporate institutional. They all work at a different pace. We are a bridge that connects the dots between all these three worlds to advance the innovation and accelerate the technology the advancement that's happening already.
Really interesting. And we'll come back to that bridge because so much is happening there. Tell me if you had 1 minute to explain why this platform is needed right now. What's different about the moment we're in and why we're doing it? What excites you?
Also, 4 years ago when I started on the journey, and I think those trends or those themes have accelerated. 3 key themes or realization that has spurred us to be where we are today with this lab. Number one, the real assets are no longer a buy and hold, a passive asset class. They're becoming more of an operational asset class. So landlords, they don't just have to buy and hold these assets and maintain them. They have to actively manage them, understand the requirements of the tenants and ongoing maintenance, and be ahead of the curve in terms of what is needed for the asset. The second realization is sustainability and climate. They have moved from a narrative to a financial variable. The building sector is one of the biggest lever in global systems. Operations of building account about 30% of final energy consumption, and about 26% of those relate to global energy emissions. If you look at the broader buildings and construction sector, it's still contributing roughly about a third of carbon emission globally. So the point is simple. If you manage the real estate at scale, you are in the climate equation, whether you like it or not. The tech is enabler to measure, optimize, and execute transition at portfolio scale. And thirdly, I would say that physical infrastructure, digital infrastructure, and energy infrastructure is converging. So RealAssetX exists because those three forces, operations, sustainability, and convergence, are reshaping risk and return. The job is to turn that into evidence-based strategy, not a hype, and help institutional portfolio adapt faster than the market reprices. So these are the key themes behind it. And AI have accelerated some of that, especially when it comes to operation, and we become more operational as a class. And of course, climate change is still happening. So we have to adapt, we have to innovate, and we have to be at the forefront of that change that's happening in our industry.
Innovative thinking stems from an openness to input from diverse sources. Exposure to new ideas feeds the creative process.
Well, a great way to frame the why, and I think following your threes, you had started with the three partners that are part of this ecosystem. So talk to us a little bit more about why we work with academia, why we work with the startup ecosystem, and then why the capital provision part of it is important as well. So that nexus that you'd started with, what's the why there?
I think it's very simple. I mentioned about three different worlds, and they're moving at three different pace, and they also have different risk and return profiles. If you look at, for example, why we created this ecosystem of different partners, I call it a system that enables innovation, that actually gives a space that people can create, innovate, and take it to the market. Academia is great at research, great at creating new IP, new models, but when it comes to incubating, that's not really their strong point. But then we went into the venture capital world. Venture capital is really good at understanding what is investable, but also what is actually going to be becoming a business model. What is people going to buy? What is actually that our customers are chasing? They're really good at identifying those patterns of technologies that is going to work in the industry. And founders and entrepreneurs, they really are turning those ideas into businesses and scaling it. And then you have the institutionals like PGIM. We have the depth of knowledge and data that none of these have. We bring the experience and we bring years and years of data that can be used to test these ideas. So ultimately, what would happen in a perfect world, that we have an idea, we go to the university partner to develop the idea for us. PGIM has the data and expertise to validate those ideas. And then we go to the venture capitalists and say, look, this is the idea, this is the company, now you scale it. In the ideal world, that's how all of these dots work. And that's why we had to create this ecosystem of different players together.
A really interesting partnership that you have to develop and nourish that ecosystem, because I'm sure none of this is easy. You use the phrase, or I've heard you talk about it in past conversations, lab mode today, fund mode tomorrow. I think you got at what that was just there, which is that sequence of it, but bring that to life a little bit more with a concept or maybe something you're working on.
Yeah. So the different worlds I talked about, there's genuine cultural differences when it comes to innovation, almost an opposite culture to traditional asset management, for example.
Innovation involves an inherent level of risk-taking in order to break new ground. Here, Naqash compares and contrasts it with the more cautious mentality that's typical of traditional investing.
So in investing, we're trained to avoid mistakes and protect downside. In innovation, if you are never failing, it usually means you're not really exploring enough and you're just doing incremental change. So that's why we have to recognize that there's a cultural difference and there are constraints that we work within in our industry. The key is to make that exploration safe, structured, and measurable. That's what lab mode is for. Lab mode gives us a controlled environment to explore, experiment, and validate ideas with tight governance, clear hypotheses, and success metrics. So before anything touches live portfolios or operating platforms, we have tested this in lab mode. We can test things like, does this improve NOI drivers? Does this reduce risks? Does this improve decision making? Or does it enhance in any meaningful way our resilience? And we can find that out very quickly, what doesn't work and why, without taking unmanaged risks. I think that's where the key is. That when it comes to innovation, of course, it has to be free so people can freely think and innovate and fail, but it has to be in an environment that's safe. It doesn't really impact the wider business.
I think you hear that a lot, that fail fast and often mantra, especially when it comes to startups and innovation and new ideas. Is that what you're trying to espouse? The safe space to test and learn, which I imagine is an iterative process.
I always say that at the end of the day, we are going to fail. When we launched this lab, I told to senior stakeholders that we are going to fail more than succeed. They was like, what? Why is this possible? Why is this even a consideration? I said, look, innovation is like that. You are going to fail. It's all about how quickly you fail. I think the biggest risk, obviously, mitigation here is failing fast, recognizing that it's not working and pivot to something else. That's the biggest risk mitigation when it comes to innovation. Not doing anything because you think it's going to fail. I think that is the biggest risk for the industry because you are going to fall behind. Anyone who thinks that they're going to innovate because they're going to fall behind, they are by default going to fall behind because of this mindset. The mindset has to change. And I think that's what the RealAssetX was focused on. That's fine. We will fail fast, but we'll keep it in a very safe environment so people can test, try, and take things further.
I assume with that ethos, part of it is also what dovetails is getting to substance quickly as well, too, right? Because I think part of the challenge, at least you hear about, is there's innovation, they're great ideas, but they need to have substance. You talked about the evidence-based element that PGIM brings to the table. How does that work in practice, though? How do you take something that's a concept, apply evidence to it, and then give it substance and move it forward?
I think at the outset, one principle we had within our lab was, we call it, the lab itself called Real Asset. But real has many meanings. The way we look at it is real challenge, real problems, real solutions for real asset markets. I've been in industry for in total about 20 years, and technology people come up with very smart and very good solutions. And then they go out and look for problems. I think that's a bigger challenge for the technology industry, especially when it comes to real assets. That's why we flip that narrative and we flip that framework and say, actually, I'm going to spend a lot of time around what is the challenge? What are the real issues that we need to tackle? Not tomorrow, day after tomorrow, but it's actually in 3 to 4 years' time. And then we just don't look at our own data. We don't look at our own expertise. We go to these partners that we have built, tech partners. We work with some of the bigger tech companies in the world, but then also go to the venture capitalists and see what they're seeing in the market. What are they seeing technologies where they are seeing the gap? And we, of course, speak to academia, and we also speak to our peers. So we create that network effect of understanding what is actually needed. Would PGIM, for example, buy that tool tomorrow, and what would we pay for it? So we're going through a very thorough view of the challenge itself, and would somebody pay for that challenge? And what ROI we're expecting from the challenge? I'll reduce a couple of % energy consumption, etc. That's not big enough. For me, it has to be more impactful than that to be able to go and do a research project.
While no one has a crystal ball, it can be exciting and beneficial to look into the future. What PGIM's cutting-edge innovation lab reveals today can identify potential opportunities tomorrow.
Helpful framing. So we'll pivot a little bit to the tangible to bring some of this to life in terms of ideas, things that we're working on. So to start, as you think about future cities or next-gen infrastructure, zooming out and looking forward several years, what are you seeing that maybe the market isn't fully pricing in yet?
So I'll mention 3 of them. Right now, we are seeing this. I initially talked about how real assets are becoming more of an operational asset class. The markets are still, for example, pricing real estate focused on cap rates, locations, and macro rates, but they're largely ignoring the percentage NOI uplift possible from AI-optimized operations on existing buildings. Market still pricing buildings like it's 2010. Real alpha making the asset you already own 20 to 30% more efficient, and almost nobody I know that has in the model yet this pricing. I think the other one, pricing, is all about ESG. We have talked about sustainability before, and we have quite a lot of understanding about green premium to brown discounts and standard risks, but the market thinks it has priced ESG. I don't think it has priced in the AI-powered ability to actually measure and fix it at scale. That's going to create a value transfer in real assets, I believe. And thirdly, I think it still has a lot of legs and would change the market how we see it. For example, tokenization and blockchain. Market still treat tokenization and tokenized infra as a niche experiment. They haven't adjusted for a future where liquidity premium compression and explosion in accessible capital that scales these projects 2-3-4 times faster. For example, illiquidity has always been a tax you pay for real assets. So if you look at from a liquidity perspective, from the capital allocation perspective, the blockchain tokenization to have that advantage or have that capability to actually create those meaningful returns, meaningful liquidity that will impact the existing frameworks. And I still think there's a lot of work needs to be done, especially on the regulation side in this blockchain tokenization world. But that's like a look towards future that could potentially have issue. Not right now, but I think potentially have a huge impact in future.
Thanks for throwing out a few ideas. Maybe then bring it a little closer to the near term. What have you actually seen recently where there was an academic concept that's now live today that was something that we acted on or an operating partner acted on?
So we've been looking at, I think I mentioned before, how much building contribute towards carbon emission. And for example, I would say between 40 to 60% comes from operation carbon. And within that, you look at HVAC and BMS actually contribute quite a lot. Because a lot of these HVAC and BMS systems are pre-configured and they're really not that efficient. So we've been looking into this problem. How can we make BMS and HVAC systems more efficient? And we've seen a lot of products in the market, AI products, basically rule-based engines. They're not really AI products. Rule-based engine, we say turn off heating at that time, turn on AC at the time, off, etc., which gave about 10 to 50% energy efficiency within those buildings. So we took this to our researcher at UCL and we asked them, look, this is a huge problem. How can we solve this? Can we use a state-of-the-art modern AI tool, a modern AI model that can actually help us really manage these HVAC systems so we can create more efficiencies? So we hired a PhD and she developed a model which we then tested on a simulation base. It gave us about 54% energy efficiency, which is huge in terms of energy consumption, carbon, and also your overall P&L. It will have a huge impact on your P&L because you're saving a lot of money on the energy side. And then we basically took that and we are currently testing it on some of our buildings. And that company is now incubated. It's called Innovi. And now we are validating it through our buildings, but then we will be scaling it across different markets as well. So this is a clear example of where we had this challenge. We know the challenge very well. We've been seeing it across the industry. We created a model that works. And now we are scaling it using our own data in the buildings, but we are all at the same time speaking to venture capital, how we can actually scale this technology for growth.
Thanks for providing that a tangible here and now what's happening. Maybe to wrap up, zoom out on the platform overall. What are the aspirations as you think about the next 12 to 24 months? What are some of the goals you have in terms of where you hope RealAssetX goes?
Number one, I would say deepening our kind of research in innovation and capabilities. We have now a center in UK with the University College London. We have now a partnership with Singapore and US. We just launched in September a innovation research center in Abu Dhabi in partnership with Abu Dhabi Investment Office and PGIM. So we want to grow those, deepen and create more research-led technologies and create the ecosystem of all of these players that I mentioned. We also plan to launch a research incubation center in US with a very credible partner. We are currently working with a couple of tech partners to really focus on agentic AI for investment decision making. So something to look for in the future. The other one is scaling what we already have built. We talk about Innovi, that's a HVAC optimization tool. We're currently also developing a tool that hopefully will be testing it and bringing it to market early next year, focused on how we can calculate embodied carbon of existing buildings. And then I think getting ready, once we have this pipeline of all the tools and technologies, creating these from a lab mode into a fund mode, where we will be launching our own investment platform to invest into these technologies, which are proven and actually an evidence base that they are technologies that are needed for the market. And there's already growth there that we have seen. So that's where we hope to go in the next couple of years.
Well, a lot on the agenda, but a lot happening already. So it'll be fun to see how it all develops. Naqash, what stood out to me in terms of takeaways from the conversation, one is just how global this theme is. As investors and talking to clients around the world about real assets, obviously in their portfolio. So this theme of what's next in terms of future-proofing that asset class, as you commented, is really a global theme. Second, I really liked how you painted the ecosystem here. This isn't just about an investment management function. It's also about how we're bringing investors into an ecosystem with academics and startups to really unlock value there for the long term. And then third was how you talked about what's happening in real assets overall. Why is this so important now is the operating aspect of the asset class, the sustainability, climate change impact and effect happening, and then the convergence of infrastructure, as you pointed out. So there's a lot here in the why now that's important as well. But really enjoyed this conversation. It's a little different from some of the other things we've dove into, but very strategic and really exciting to see what you and the team are doing. So thank you for the time.
Thank you, Keshav, for having me. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Join us next time where we dive into the results of a yearly investor survey conducted by Montana Capital Partners, the private equity secondaries business of PGIM. That's next time on Speaking of Alternatives.
Speaking of Alternatives with Keshav Rajagopalan, a podcast from PGIM. Follow, subscribe, and if you like what you hear, go ahead and give us a review. And be sure to look for the podcast, The Outthinking Investor, also from PGIM. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Views and opinions expressed may not reflect PGIM's and are subject to change. This is not a solicitation. Copyright 2026 PFI and its related entities registered in many jurisdictions worldwide. Please visit the Terms and Conditions page on www.pgim.com. PFI is not affiliated in any manner with Prudential plc, incorporated in the United Kingdom, or with Prudential Assurance Company, a subsidiary of M&G plc, incorporated in the United Kingdom.